there was these languages that were so fundamental to interacting with technology at a deeper way. And it was kind of like a barrier to entry for a lot of things. Like if you really wanted to be a technologist, you had to know something about Python or something about some type of language. Now you don't need to. Now, if you know English and if you know enough about how the technology works behind the scenes, I think you can interact with all of these programming languages and create great products by just knowing English or any natural language.
Hey everyone, I'm Debbie Madden. I'm the host of the Scaling Tech podcast. Today, I have two good friends with me today, Rob and Moin. Hey guys, how you doing?
Good.
Doing well.
Awesome.
Good to be here.
Really excited to have this conversation. We're going to call it English is the New Python. And for everyone listening, I think we kind of know what that means, but it means to us why it's so important right now to invest in empowering human beings and not just advancing technology, all the rage about Gen AI, prompt engineering, all of these things. So we're really going to focus in on why we think that English is a new Python. So before I jump in with my questions, for those that don't know you guys, so Rob O'Brien works with me at Stride. So Rob, I've known for many, many years. He's a partner at Stride with over 10 years working in product and management consulting. And he's been working with clients on AI for the last year plus. And that's an oversimplification. Rob does many, many, many things. So lucky to have him with us today. And then Moin Haque, again, this is going to be a huge oversimplification. Moin is an amazing individual and technologist. He has been stewarding data analytics and AI for a company called IFF, International Flavors and Fragrances, a global organization. And he's been passionate about technology and data for over 2 decades. And I've known Moin for many, many years as well. So let's jump in with what do you mean? And you, Rob, Moin, I would love to hear from both of you on this. Why do you think English is the new Python? Like, what does this topic mean to you?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So the phrase it's kind of a little bit more of a shtick or somewhat provocative statement, but the goal really it's to highlight that there's a potential disruption in how we engage with technology, and that disruption is sort of going on. And just to clarify, we're saying English, but this is not so much specifically about English. It's the idea of natural language in general. It's how we communicate. And there's been in all my experience with technology, there's always been some level of inherent or implicit inefficiency. But when you have the ability to communicate in natural language, there's an efficiency there. And if done right, there's also greater efficacy when you have natural language interfaces. You sort of think of the swivel chairs going away, all of the interfaces and applications, and the way we kind of try to take what we're trying to do and fit it into some user experience to hope for the outcome we need and go on to the next step. A lot of that goes away, and we're seeing a lot of disruption across the board. I mean, I'm seeing it in the BI space. We're seeing it in the RPA space. It's redefining a lot of the ways we interact, build, and approach these technologies. So in that way, sort of that's where the phrase for me sort of resonates, because Python was becoming so ubiquitous. It is somewhat ubiquitous as a lower barrier to entry, as an interface for us to interact. And we're at a point where we can say we can go a little further and actually use our natural language, our natural communications to achieve those outcomes as well.
I love that. If you can tell my junior in high school that, I would appreciate it.
Hey.
So yeah, Rob, what's your take on it?
Obviously, you always make Moin go first, so you can just say everything Moin said plus some other things. But yeah, one of the things that Moin and I were chatting about offline too, when we chatted about this, was why Python? Like, I know that's the weird part. The part is, everyone's emphasizing the English because we're interacting with models and AI where it can use this natural language. But Moin and I had a little fun of why Python and not JavaScript or something like that. And, I think Moin's hot take was because JavaScript is a scripting language. It's not actually a programming language, which is a fun one. And for me, I think you've seen this English is the new Python kind of tag phrase, or, I pulled up some other articles that have come out recently of the next big programming language is English, or English is the new Python is a couple different blog posts. Databricks even had one that said introducing English as the new programming language for Spark. And this was a year ago. And I think what it means is, like Moin was saying, there was these languages that were so fundamental to interacting with technology at a deeper way. And it was kind of like a barrier to entry for a lot of things. Like if you really wanted to be a technologist, you had to know something about Python or something about some type of language. Now you don't need to. Now, if you know English and if you know enough about how the technology works behind the scenes, I think you can interact with all of these programming languages and create great products by just knowing English or any natural language.
I have a curiosity around then. How do you know when the technologies that you do use are wrong? Do you have a quick response to that before we move on to other, right? Like if what you're saying is true, then how do you know if the tools and like if I don't know Python myself, but I know English, if I were to ask, a tool to code something in Python, how would I then know if it got it correct or not?
No, I mean, it's a great point. It's not a replacement fully. It's not saying, hey, I can just pivot to this. It's an evolving space. But I think part of it is you still similar to Python or any programming language. If you take that approach, you're going to go through code reviews. You're going to go through testing. So you're still going to have those sort of common sense approaches to it. But I think it's going to continue to evolve over time. And we'll see better sort of efficiency come out of it.
Yeah, I think that the end goal is you won't know and you won't care, right? We keep getting layers of abstraction technology that we don't care about, right? Like how often are we really double checking that the binary of the computer is spitting out zeros and ones correctly? Because like it doesn't, you get to a point where it's not there. So, or, where it's not necessary. To Moin's point, I don't think we're there yet. So these are really enhancers rather than replacers. But I think the end goal, I mean, we talked about this at a dinner once, Moin, with a bunch of other technologists of, hey, instead of implementing a CRM or picking which one you want, we might get to the point where you just custom create one and you say, hey, AI, I need this for this purpose, and it just builds it. And you don't need to know how it works under the hood. It doesn't matter. As long as the outcome that you're pushing for is achieved, why does it matter? But we're not there yet.
Yeah, but similar to how there are other things that most citizens take for granted. Like I don't know what the foundation of my house is built on, so long as it doesn't collapse under my feet, I'm good, right? And so I think it's if you can extrapolate. So thank you for putting that in perspective. So if we go with this thesis, English is a new Python, and it's evolving. What do you think that organizations could or should do now to get ahead of this? And then as you're answering it, where do you think they'll struggle and where do you think they'll excel? So as you answer, like, okay, everyone needs to do these 3 things and this is going to be the hardest, or this will be the easiest or most successful, or add some color into as you answer.
So I think just following up on that last point, like how do you know it's working? And I think the example with the house is great, and that applies to business as well, is it's important to really get a sense of what are the outcomes we're expecting, what are the goals we're trying to achieve, because that's ultimately how we're going to measure if it's working or not. Like, so in the house example, you may not know what the foundation is made of, but as long as that house is standing up, it's doing what it's supposed to do, because your outcome is you don't want the house to collapse. And I think this is a great opportunity for businesses, if we haven't already, is to really sort of understand the nature of our organizations, the nature of our processes, how they relate, and put together some kind of understanding of all the signals, insights, and actions. There's a great sort of way to formalize it. There's many approaches, but one that I think works really well is for companies to start to build towards what are called knowledge graphs. And these are kind of foundational elements to then use natural language to navigate and to drive actions. A knowledge graph is just one technology, but the goal is you want to end up with a way to have a digital map for your organization, a dynamic one, so that you can navigate towards whatever outcome you're trying to achieve or discover opportunities and so forth. So I think those are key things. And it also, a lot of it comes back to data. Just being a data person, I'm not just advocating for data, but having a really trusted foundation in data is going to also yield trusted results and outcomes. And we're seeing that with traditional approaches in AI. We're seeing that with generative AI. And I think having natural language interfaces built on those trusted data foundations are also going to yield better results. So these are kind of things that organizations should really posture for, from my perspective.
Yeah, Rob, before you jump in, I'm wondering, and I don't know if we know the answer to this, but I'm curious what your thoughts are, Moin, on whose job is it in the organization to move this needle forward. It could be if you have a data organization or, a chief data officer, or it could be the CTO, it could be the CIO, it could be a new position. Like, is this one of those jobs to be done that right now, because it's emerging, can be done by many roles?
I think it can. I think you can either try to figure out, do we do this end to end for the organization, or do we really try to drive value in some area, in some domain, in some specific opportunity? So it does need the right sponsorship, needs the right champion. And I think for it to be effective, it'll need stewardship across functions in an organization. And again, depending on the specific company, depending on how they're structured, how the capabilities are organized, it could be any of the roles you talk about, but it really needs to be someone who can champion it sort of end to end.
I think this is so important, and I love this where we're going, because we've seen this before. Technologists know how to do this, right? We did, product ownership wasn't a job. Now it's a job, right? Scrum master, UX designer, talent brand. These are just some things that came into my head that like didn't exist when I started my career, and now we have another opportunity. And I think this also goes to show that the job of the technologist is going to change in the future. It doesn't mean that it's going lesser or more. It's shifting, and now we have these new, very important areas that need stewardship, that need champions, and this is one very important early one out of the gate. So
Yeah.
I really love this. So Rob, what's your
I
take?
was just going to say, just building off that last point you made, it's something really interesting that I noticed is when all the ChatGPT and a lot of the models were launched and people were leveraging them, the whole thing of prompt engineering, and I got to hire prompt engineers, and everyone's got to get up to it. And to be honest, a lot of the conversations that I was having with different leaders and different people was, yeah, this might be the phase right now that you have to interact with the prompt, but that's just a temporary thing. It's been like a yearish. I actually feel like I'm hearing more and more about like, oh no, we really got to double down on prompts. Like it's very interesting because I think a lot of people originally thought it was going to be the technology and the workflows, and there's going to be all the putting of the pieces together. And I think what we're finding is, no, it really does come down to English and that prompt. And it's the different types of prompts. So not to start to sell this a little bit, but like Stride Conductor, the product we have, which is a multi-agent framework and a tool to do that. What we're finding is the complexity is in the prompts of each of the agents and the pre-prompts to have them interact with each other. And the amount of change that needs to be done in that area, that's English, right? We're not talking about different connections or creating a new API. A lot of the changes that we see of ways to enhance the outcomes that we want to deliver are through changing prompts, enhancing prompts, adding new prompts. And that's all English, right? That's the beauty of this is like, I really thought, I think 6 months ago, I feel like everyone was like, prompts, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. And now I'm hearing this massive resurgence as everyone's thinking about things like a multi-agent framework of, oh man, these prompts are so critical. So it's funny to see that 12-month cycle of it's all about prompts. Prompts maybe aren't that important. And now we're back to it's all about prompting. So I don't know, Moin, if you agree or disagree, but.
No, I definitely agree. I mean, I think your point was right in the beginning. It was seen as, okay, this is not going to really be a thing. It's going to go away. But I think the step that for me that I saw changes, we did start to enable those technologies.
Right.
And when you enable them, so it's no longer an academic or an abstract thing. We've now enabled these capabilities. Most of these capabilities are now they're built into our incumbent platforms, right? They're in our Office 365 environments. They're in our Google workspaces. They're in any platform we work in. You quickly realize that enablement's not enough. I need to equally empower to get the value out of it. And I think that empowerment piece is what's calling out the need for this investment, the need in teaching people these reasoning skills, the critical thinking skills, and how to craft their needs.
So as you guys have been a front row seat at this evolution, and it's still early days, have you come across any external resources or tools, books, courses that are, or are we not there yet? Right? Are we still in the like R&D phase of this, and everyone's kind of learning together, or are you aware of any? We can put links in the bottom of the show notes or anything, but as folks are listening and saying, oh, this is interesting, I want to really enable and empower, or I really want to create a digital map of my organization, or want to focus on things like English is new Python to summarize, and prompt engineering. Where have you seen the tech industry go to look for just playbooks and things of that nature?
Now, I was going to say there's actually too much out there, and it is changing too quickly. Just to, I think almost every learning platform has some kind of path on prompt engineering. Almost any platform out there has enough courseware on this. So it's really about kind of choosing what they are, which one to focus on, and maybe already in an ecosystem you use. So I think some of those fundamentals are key, but it really goes back to me, it goes back to core skills, anything that'll help you focus on mindful communication, on curating empathy, on finding context, because those fundamental skills, I look at the prompting similar to programming, it's tactical, but I really need to have that foundational context so that I can have a way to critically think, what am I trying to achieve? What is the outcome I'm trying to get to? And then bring in the more tactical skills, which there's an inordinate amount of resources out there on the prompting side. But I think it also is good to revisit a lot of the things that we should always be revisiting: critical reasoning, critical thinking, effective communication, mindful communication. And I'm married to a marriage and family therapist, and I'm learning a lot of every day is a teachable moment in a good way, but I'm learning a lot of the ability to apply structured dialogue and communication outside of the home. And it's those models and those frameworks are actually very effective.
I think we need to have another podcast with your wife on.
Yeah.
Moin, I'm annoyed. I wanted you to go first because I would be like, oh yeah, I was going to give a totally different opinion, but it's very similar, which is a bummer. I was going to say one of my own personal faults is my my instinct is always to learn by doing. So I was going to say I don't have a good list of external resources, but I have some patterns that I think are important for people. And one is, and also I was going to share, as you guys know, my wife's a lawyer, so my communication is always being picked at, and my word choices and my structure and all of that, which has helped me, right? And I think that's why those types of people and that clear communication can help. But something I like to do is to have a problem that you already have, and it can be something small in your personal life and something simple that you know how to solve, but try to solve it through prompting and try to solve it through one of these tools and start really small, right? And try to get it to I'm trying to think of a good example here of something that's small, of using a prompt engineer. Build me a schedule for a trip is a good example, right? Build me a schedule for a trip to Portugal and optimize for these things. You're going to see the first response and you're going to be like, oh, I was really vague. It really doubled down on restaurants. I'm not focused on restaurants. I'm more at adventures. And you're like, oh, wait, but if I don't say that and I'm not clear on what I want it to prioritize, and you start to learn these patterns, and they're the same patterns that extend to a really technical thing or writing code. So start with these small things that you would do in your personal life and try to interact with the model that way and work on prompting. And then you'll start to see that expands, and that same structures and patterns that evolve are the same for when you're doing something at work. So that would be my advice of a way to upskill on this. But yeah, I was hoping more. These three are the best, but
yeah, I mean, it's so fast moving. There's so much there. I think the one call out I would say is, when we talk about prompting, one thing we need to be aware of as humans is we don't speak the way we write. And a lot of foundationally what's being consumed or trained in these models is coming from written. Now that's bridging quite a bit. And we saw the impact over the last 10 years of social media ad, which has really changed a lot of the way we communicate. There's more brevity, there's more emotion. It's even multimodal if you count emojis in some way. So that gap, I think, will bridge over time, but it is something to keep in the back of your head that I don't necessarily speak the way that I write.
Yeah. And so this leads us to the thing that is probably on many parents' minds at this point, because it's on my mind. So let's talk about the upcoming generation, right? So college STEM students, should they build their tech skills and their English skills? What impact could this have on college courses, on the students that are coming out? Like, what's your thinking on how kids in college and high school just getting out into the workforce should really think about this? Because their way of communication, they, meaning, let's call current college students, is different than I know mine, right? Just in the brevity, in the emojis, that I'm still behind on. I'm not.
Same
I'm not.
here. Yeah.
I'm not up to date. I try to
Well,
be, but I'm not. So yeah, how do STEM kids think about this, and how do tech leaders think about giving advice to their college age kids? Big question. Just answer any part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, just going back to my own experiences in undergrad, which is quite a while ago, I would say the more holistic you can be in in the education and the experience, the better it is. Um, STEM is great. I think it brings a whole different lens and approach. But we've heard the term STEAM over STEM, which kind of adds that piece. And I think that holistic piece is really important because it's like when you look at any discipline, like if I'm going to study math or science, if I can study the philosophy of it as well as the tactical application of it, I'm gonna be better postured because the tactical pieces will change over time. The programming I learned 20 years ago, it has changed, but the approaches to solutioning, the patterns that I'm going to look for to unlock ways to approach it, those are going to be similar. And so it's important to really look at things in that holistic context. And I'm hoping that the programs themselves that are there start to incorporate that, or if they're not, kids should seek out an opportunity to do that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I think you can't ignore the technology. You need to understand it, and I agree with Moin too on just the tactical specific things are fine. But I think an interesting lens here too is we English being the new Python for these languages you can use, and they're very good at these types of generative AI tools to understand and learn about technology. So you have a bunch of code and you're looking at it, you don't understand it. Instead of just ignoring it, ask, can you explain to me what this does? I have found I've become more technical by writing prompts to try to write code, to then look at the rest of the code and be like, oh, I don't understand what it wrote here. As a non engineer, I'm a product person. But now I'm like, I'm not going to grab an engineer. I'm going to say, hey, can you explain to me what this code is doing and how it works? And then it does, and I don't understand something. And I prompt it again. And I say, hey, what about this line item? I'm not quite sure what this service is doing or something. And it's like, oh yeah, this is a learning tool. So these tools also can make you better technologists. So learning how to use them will make you better at understanding technology. I think it won't get you further away from it.
I think that's so important, Rob. I think there is this myth amongst high school and college kids that if you use generative AI or AI tools, you're cheating. But in fact, most oftentimes you're learning.
Oh yeah.
You can use it to cheat, but you also can use it to learn. And I think there's just this weird fight that's been going on between students and teachers that, like, how do we all coexist with these technologies? And if we say, how do we have kids run into it as a learning tool, I feel like those barriers would melt away.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like that call out you're making because now I'm thinking back to an experience I had in undergrad, and it really depends on what we measure knowledge against. So I've been in classes where you'll get a test and it's closed book, and you've approached it very differently than if you go into a class where you get a test and it's open book, and the questions are very different. It's the application of knowledge to solve that problem. And I think that's how we need to look at these tools. I'm really using them and applying them to solve a problem. I'm not trying to mimic them. I'm not trying to sort of do what they're doing, but how do they sort of accentuate and help me get to that end state?
Yep, absolutely.
I love that. It goes back to the show your work thing, because that's what we wanted. That's learning. It's how you got there, right? I think, I think in my time at McKinsey, this was something we used to learn when we would be doing case study interviews. I can tell you the inside information. The scoring of their interviews for the case study, the answer was actually not that high of a score. They didn't actually care if you got the answer right from the case study. What they cared about was framework. Could you explain yourself? Did you have a pattern that you were following? Was it something that someone could follow along and plug into? And these are the same type of things, right? So it's knowing how to solve problems and knowing how to learn, not necessarily just the answer at the end. And I think that's, if you're an educator and you're just looking at the answer, you're missing out on really understanding where your students are struggling, what's sticking and what's not. So I think it's really thinking about how you think is going to be the most important thing. And it always has been, and I think it always will be.
Yeah, that's great. So sadly we're out of time. I have one last question before we end up. And, is there, like, what do you think the next new English is going to be, right? So if English is new Python, what's going to be the new English? I don't know how we can answer this question, but
Yeah.
do you have any crystal ball insights you want to share with us?
No, I mean, I can say I've tuned my crystal ball to look just 6 months ahead
Okay,
in this
all right.
environment. I'm not trying to look any further, but I think the trend we're seeing is that it's going towards multimodal. It's going towards more ambient computing, right? That's the term we're kind of hearing, where it's not this purpose-built interface I'm going to go to and even speak natural language with, but it's something that has a multimodal context. We saw that in the announcements from Google this week. We're seeing it in the way the interfaces are changing. So I think that shift towards multimodal and ambient in the near term is something we should posture for beyond language.
I was going to go way out there and say,
Yeah.
what is English and language, but in a limited interface for us to communicate our brains to each other as humans, right? Like that's the way I can do that. I think in the far future, it's just going to be straight. You're just going to be straight plugged in, right? Thoughts and experiments you have here, and it's not going to be English. Thoughts is going to be the new English because thinking will be translated. I think language, I think typing, I think all these are just interfaces, and they're just kind of bad ones from a totally different time. So I'm going way out there, but it's going to be.
Yeah.
And I don't actually, maybe
Yeah.
it's not way out there, but it's going to be.
Yeah.
Thoughts is going to be the new English.
All right, so that we've got
There
the
you go.
6 month and the TBD timeline. Well, guys, listen, this has been a ton of fun. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the time. What an engaging conversation, and thank you to everyone for listening.